Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Tapping into Culture with VinePair and Sixpoint. I'm Cat Wolinski, Senior Editor at VinePair, and I am joined today by Max Finnance from Sixpoint. What's up, Max?
Hi, how's it going?
And our guest today is Dan Lamonaca. Dan is the owner and proprietor of Beer Karma, one of my favorite beer shops here in New York City, and also somebody who's super on top of our topic today, which is trends, 2021 beer trends. What's happening? So, Dan, hi.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I would like to start by asking, what's the top selling beer styles in your shop right now? What's been going on in, the past year and pandemic? Have you seen things shifting, or is everyone still just drinking hazies?
It's very heavy on hazies as always, especially among people that are kind of looking for specific things. One of the things that I started to notice over the last couple of months is that people were doing a little bit less of the, let me try the new thing from a brewery that came in from out of town. A little bit less of the mixed 4 and 8 packs and a little bit more of the cool, I know I like Wrench or Grim or Other Half, and I'm going to buy 4 of these and that's it. In regards to hazies, kind of a little bit more focused drinking. I think people knowing they're going to be at home and not really sharing with friends, they were a little more resistant to try new things or have the, didn't want to buy something they didn't like. They wanted to buy something they knew that was going to be good and they were going to enjoy at home with their loved ones and not enjoying it with friends in a pub.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, there's kind of the sadder aspect of, kind of hoarding to be drinking up at home. But I think it's also cool to see that's sort of how people's loyalty started to come out. I would do the same thing. Normally I would pick out, as many different things as possible because I'm always wanting to try new things. But then, when it comes to trying to limit your time out in the store or in the world, you end up kind of sticking to your favorites and
and you lose the opportunity to split a beer, right? Multiple ways at least, right? So it's hey, if I'm drinking this whole thing myself, I better be drinking something that I truly enjoy and don't just want 3, 4, or 5 ounces of.
Makes sense. So
yeah.
What do you think, Max?
I think that in particular is a great point, Dan. As a consumer myself, if I'm going to be buying a beer right now, I'm less inclined to buy that pastry stout that finishes super, super sweet and is clean and, the type of thing I might really enjoy drinking 3 ounces of, but don't want to drink 16 ounces or 750 milliliters of by myself. So I think that's changed some consumer patterns, at least while we're all still drinking alone and quarantined or drinking together via Zoom instead of around a table.
And from a brewery perspective, Max, do you think that's affecting what breweries are producing? I mean, are we seeing less time and tank space devoted to pastry stouts or other things like that?
I think I think sort of that has more to do with Dan's first point. And I think, right now, a lot of breweries are focusing more on their flagship style beers, the beers that are trusted brands by the consumers, the things that customers know they love, because those are what people want to buy when they go to the grocery store and can buy their beer next to their groceries. Or even if they're buying beers, through some app like Drizzly, you don't want to end up with a beer you don't like. So I think breweries tend to be scaling back on all innovation right now a little bit and focusing more of their effort on, taking this opportunity to really dial in their flagships and make sure they have everything right there, because that's where consumers are shopping. Right.
What are Sixpoint's flagships?
I think it's got to be Resin and the Crisp, especially in the New York City area. If you want a double IPA and you want that bang for your buck, and we've all had plenty of excuses over the last year to need some bang for our buck. That 9.1% in Resin is a great way to go. But if you're looking for a little bit more refreshment and something you can have several of without forgetting your Friday night, the Crisp is probably your better option and closer to our flagship in that area.
And the Crisp, that's Pilsner, right?
Correct. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know that we as beer geeks love lagers. We love to talk about them. We love to drink them and depend on them for those at home in between moments. Is this for either of you, Dan, especially in your shop, I'm wondering, are lagers from smaller breweries gaining popularity? Like, is this something that's happening among the broader consumer, or is it like just geeks making beer for other geeks?
I mean, I think to some extent there needs to be consumer demand, right? Because if the lagers are taking up significant tank space for a longer period of time, like the breweries need to sell it. So there's definitely demand. I don't think we're at the tipping point yet of like lagers taking over the world. I feel like that's always like every beer writer's like crossing their fingers at the next year for trends of like it's only going to be lagers. But I think definitely more so than usual. I mean, I kind of like bullhorn lagers, on social media, and we have we really had our lager night. I still try and do it in quarantine, but it's a little bit harder. Pushing it. And I always have a good selection of local and smaller batch lager things in the cooler, and I feel like they definitely are selling better than they used to. I feel like people definitely want that like lighter thing next to the double IPA. And I think there are a lot of good hoppy lagers and pilsners, which I know crisp kind of falls into that realm, but that's always a good where like the traditionalists don't want that. But for the people that enjoy IPAs, they're not quite IPLs, but they're definitely, they have that hoppy aroma. So it's kind of a good bridge gap when someone's like, hey, I want something a little bit lighter. I like hoppy. It's sort of like, hey, get this thing because you're going to enjoy that just as much as you are the IPA without being drunk and hungover, just from sitting on your couch at home on Zoom calls with friends.
Right. And that, like another trend I feel like I like to watch, or trends is with just the nomenclature that we use. I mean, do people still use IPL or India Pale Lager? I feel like lagers, I love hoppy lagers, but like
much less. I can think of a handful, but that's kind of the joke is that you try one of the fresh hoppy lagers and you're like, this is an IPL, but you can't put it on the label. So you're seeing it labeled as being a hoppy lager, hoppy pilsner, but reluctant to call it an IPL. Even if it is 5.5%, 6% alcohol, the branding I feel like is shifting towards calling it a crispy type thing and not the like IPA thing.
Okay, so maybe for folks out there who are watching and don't live and breathe beer nerd culture, what are Crispies and why are they boys?
I thought it's not a Bud Light thing. It was sort of like an internet culture thing. It was just referring to the pilsners and lagers as crispy boys because they're light and crisp, right? And I think it was just a fun, cheeky way to refer to them. I forget. There is some like specific origin. It was actually someone that was commenting on a Bud Light Twitter thing, and then Bud Light kind of stole it from them, if I'm not mistaken.
Wait, really? I didn't know like the etymology of this.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain it was some guy like talking about I'm gonna go home and drink a bunch of crispy boys, like referring to Bud Light, and then Bud Light just adopted it and then didn't actually credit the person.
Oh, and then like the rest of us adopted it too.
All too common on the internet these days.
Yeah. I guess like if you have any questions about beer terms and beer culture, first of all, read VinePair. But secondly, just like scour Reddit and beer Twitter and you'll find your answers.
Yes. Yeah, it should be noted though that beer Twitter and beer Reddit are both like rabbit holes you can go down and just
terrible places to spend your time.
Yeah.
Sure. It's easy to overdo it on those. Right, absolutely.
Yeah. I think another style that I like to talk to people about and get excited about is saisons. And I think that a lot of people don't really maybe know the category that well or understand what it is or like what's the difference between a saison and a farmhouse ale. Some are sour, some are not. How would you position that for people? And do you think that those are also, is that another emerging or like re-emerging style?
I mean, I hope so. It's definitely a harder sell than the Pilsner lager category, especially, I mean, it's not a beer style you could sit back and drink 4 or 5 of. You're definitely seeing more of them. I mean, I see that people tend to want saisons that are fruited. right? I think it's an easier sell if it's something like, hey, this is a bright, I have one right now that's, I think, second use Merlot skins, and it's bright magenta and it's beautiful. I'm like, that's an easier sell than, oh, hey, here's this Brett table beer that's 3.7%. So yes, me too. I
that
want
Brett
that.
beer.
Yeah, I would say if it's fruited, people tend to want it a little bit more. If it's just, estery, peppery, lemony, it's a little bit harder of a sell. Three started doing some second use fruit beers this year. Their Thought Experiment series, I believe, and it's like stuff like that. I'm like, ooh, like way more of that. But I would say saisons are a way harder sell than lagers are. It was definitely the one thing, like, as beer karma developed, like I would put 2 or 3 saisons on tap early on, and it was just a bad idea because they would stay on tap for weeks, if not more than a month. And I was like, okay, one saison, maybe 2, my max.
Interesting. So maybe that's more of like a bottle, like special bottle section
style. Yeah, it's a good excuse to, like, hey, here's a 750. It's a good thing to bring to a dinner party or show up to when you're seeing friends. In quarantine, that's been my wife and I's like, hey, we're gonna do like a meat and cheese and cracker platter and like open a couple of like really nice bottles of saison. Almost a weekly occurrence. It's to a fault, but a good excuse to open a nice bottle of saison.
Oh, I love that. How about you, Max? What's your like at-home guilty pleasure?
I mean, I'm sort of with you on, both of those. Like, I love a good, whether it's a table beer or a grisette, saison, farmhouse, whatever, envelope you want to put it into. Maybe it's aspirational on my part, but I do wish that those styles, just like the, the crispy boys and all those lagers, and maybe I would even expand it to classic styles brewed very well, which I think we're seeing a little bit of a resurgence of from some of the smaller breweries in particular. Any of those things are happy to find their way onto my table on a Tuesday night or a Friday night, typically with some sort of meat and cheese and accoutrement plate as well.
Do you think that people are now more aware of the concept of beer and food pairing now, or should they be? I mean, I know that I do that all the time. I drink a beer with dinner almost every night. But I feel like people don't really know what to do with like beer pairings. I mean, what do you think?
I think that they should be, as a general place to start that answer. Food pairing with beer is in a lot of ways really easy, and even easier than wine pairing with food. And so many people, when you talk about pairing to food, their mind first goes to wine because we've been talking about that for decades. And the wine industry has done a really good job of incorporating that with sommeliers in restaurants. And, there are wine pairings if you go to a fancy restaurant. But beer, for almost all food, beer works better than wine does, right? Beer is brewed with malt, and malt is a grain. And so you bring all of these grain-based flavors to the beverage, which sometimes are present in the meal itself, but sometimes there's no bread or, baked goods in your dish. And that flavor side by side sort of completes that meal and rounds it out. Yeah, it's definitely something I talk about a lot. I mean, the spectrum of flavors you can get from beers is so much wider than the spectrum of flavors you can get from wines. 4 ingredients versus 1 ingredient. And then, not to mention the fact that brewers these days will brew with any ingredient, so the spectrum is really almost limitless. Right. If you want to add chili flavor to a food, you could do a chili beer side by side with it. You don't have to add some cayenne to your dish. So, yes, I guess that's a long way of saying I wish consumers were a little bit more willing to get themselves out of their comfort zone when it comes to beer pairing, because it's not as hard as most people think. I think people just need to like take that leap and say like, oh, this is really good with my dinner, and I should try this more.
For sure. And I think the cheese plate or like a meat and cheese is a really good place to start. I've like definitely seen people's minds be blown when I'm like, try that IPA with your blue cheese. And they're like, whoa, I've never done that before. Like it totally changes it. And it does. I mean, it's all just about experimentation, right? Like just open up a beer and try it with everything you're eating on your plate, and you'll find what you like eventually.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, there are bad pairings, just like there are bad pairings with wine and food. But I've never had a pairing so bad that it like ruined what I was drinking or ruined what I was eating and, destroyed the rest of my meal.
Max, I dare you to try a pastry stout with oysters. I bet that would be
That sounds pretty nasty.
Depending on the pastry stout, you could be right. But on the flip side, one of the most classic pairings with oysters is Guinness or a dry Irish stout. So
good point. Yeah.
Maybe it would work. I don't know. I'll tell you what, Dan, I'll give it a shot.
Good. Godspeed.
Yeah, that's really funny. So sort of on the opposite end of the interesting flavors and culinary exploration spectrum, seltzer. Thoughts, feelings. Dan, are you carrying hard seltzers? Are you considering carrying them?
No, I probably should consider it. One of the things I don't think it's slowing down anytime soon, especially for the bigger brands. And I think we're going to start to see more smaller brands enter the market. So I mean, that's where it kind of becomes the like from my like, how I want beer karma to be. It's like, well, okay, if these brands that I love or breweries that I love are making hard seltzer with some actual fruit and not just some fruit extract or flavoring, maybe I would consider it, especially from a, hey, it is a business and the COVID has not been friendly to us. Yeah, I definitely don't see it slowing down. I'm interested to see how the smaller brands play into it, right? Do they actually gain some traction? Do the breweries that are putting hard seltzer into 6 or 12 packs like actually stick with it and it become a success point for them? I personally don't drink it. I don't really understand it. Right. But this is also coming from someone who has an appreciation for, actual food and actual beverage, and just sort of knowing that it's sugar water that's fermented very quickly and some sort of flavoring added to it. Like I can't even bring myself to drink one. It's a trend that I hope that goes away almost as much as milkshake IPAs. But it's definitely one that I don't see slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah. What do you think, Max?
I mean, I will admit I do occasionally drink a seltzer. It's definitely not my go-to choice of beverages. I'd probably beer, then wine, then seltzer for me. I would probably even put bourbon above seltzer. but I do occasionally reach for one of those. Full disclosure, and we're going to talk more about this in a later episode, but Sixpoint has a seltzer coming out in the next couple months. So we're trying to get in on that action as well because we don't think it's going away anytime soon either. But yeah. I don't think it's going to overtake Hazy IPAs. Definitely not in 2021. I don't think it'll overtake Hazy IPAs before it disappears in terms of the total consumption you see from the craft brewery side of things.
Oh, okay.
I mean, maybe if you look at total sales nationwide, then sure, there's some really big players in that space.
Yeah. Kind of like there's a chance with hard seltzer taking over Hazy IPA on the whole. But in terms of what a brewery is devoting its production to, certainly craft breweries, smaller independent breweries, they won't probably make such a dramatic shift. But I mean, look at Boston Beer.
It's true. I mean, I guess yeah, if you use an example like Boston Beer, I might have to eat my words sooner than later. But I guess I'm hoping that breweries will be able to stick to producing mostly beer and, just have a little side project of seltzer to sort of get their skin in the game and, take a little bite of the share away from those real big players.
And what about all the other sort of in between, like their RTDs or ready to drink beers, like beer-like drinks? There's now, other than seltzer, there's like hard kombucha and hard tea and all these different kind of like better for you, sort of health conscious type of things. And then there's also, of course, non-alcoholic beer, which, that's another conversation too. I think those are absolutely getting better in quality, and there's a lot more options out there now than there were. I drink them like in supplement to a normal night of drinking normal beer. But what do you think about all these like different things that are hard to categorize?
I mean, I think it's good to have options, right? Especially on the gluten-free end of the spectrum, right? Because it's like wine isn't sessionable, it shouldn't be. So it's like to sort of have those other things. I mean, I know hard kombucha was making a big push in the city and selling really well. I know cocktail bars were putting it on tap and then using that as an easy add-in for cocktails. It's a crowded market, but I think it's good to have other options, right? Because even cider, people get a little bit tired of cider because as much as there can be some nuance, like it's a pretty like narrow spectrum of flavors as far as like, okay, it's an Apple thing. But it's definitely interesting to watch, right? I mean, I think that everyone's sort of looking for something a little bit different, a little bit lighter on the carbohydrate side. So something to keep an eye on. But I think one of the points I was going to make regarding seltzer is that the genius of it is that it's very repeatable, right? I mean, you can drink another seltzer again and again and again, and you're not going to get any palate fatigue, and you could just keep hammering through a 6 or probably 12 pack for the people that are in their early 20s and haven't started getting bad hangovers yet.
So this is something we kind of talked about in like the VinePair virtual editorial world. Do you think that people like younger, people in their 20s or college students, are they even partying with beer anymore? Like, are they having keggers, or do you think everyone's just drinking White Claw?
I think it's more of the latter. When you're that age and you want to be able to, go out and get really drunk on something like beer. I mean, one of the complaints people have always had about beer is that it fills you up pretty quickly. And I think you don't get that sensation with drinking something like a seltzer. I would put hard kombucha into that same category, but I don't know if there's a whole lot of 21-year-olds out there drinking hard kombucha.
Yeah, that's a weird one for me. I feel like, why not the tart, lemony, Brett fermented table beer if you want like a kombuchas are super like funky and sour a lot of the time. Although I guess they're also sweetened when they're kind of the more mass market versions. For
sure. Yeah, some of them anyway. I mean, I like to dabble in that space as well. I guess just as a consumer and as a fan of good food and good beverages, I want to see what's out there in terms of the full spectrum of flavors like we talked about. And, I'm always thinking about, if I'm drinking a hard kombucha, like what flavors about this do I like? Do you find these in the beer world? If not, how could we try and get these similar flavors out of a table beer or something like that? And then what kind of dinners or appetizers or whatever would I want to pair this with?
Oysters, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, along the same lines of, a goose working really well with oysters. Some kombuchas probably would too.
For sure.
As long as we're not talking about something that's super back sweetened and, really wild flavors.
Mm-hmm. So what else is out there? Any final predictions? I mean, we're in February now, so we've got some time, but what do you think?
I figure like that you mentioned it quickly, the non-alcoholic beer, right? I think that's going to be something there's going to be a lot more of that because there's better versions of it, right? I mean, I think the Athletic Brewing kind of was the vanguard of that, at least on the American side. So I think a little bit more of that, and more people wanting to drink that and looking for that. So I think a lot more non-alcoholic beer, and then micro trend, at least sort of in the region, a lot more black lagers. I think that for if you're not in the like small batch pastry stout game, I think on the hype end of that spectrum where people are running to your brewery to buy $40 bottles of it, having a black lager is a really nice way to move through sort of large volumes of a dark roasty beer, especially in your tap room or in a bar that's like easy drinking. You get those roasty notes that you want from a stout without it being heavy at all. So more black lager, please.
Yes, more black lager, please. Agreed.
I like that prediction for 2021. I think, I sort of have to split it into two, because the aspirational side of me definitely wants to see more of those, whether it's Czech dark lagers or Schwartz beers or even, British bitters just brewed really well by these local breweries. Like, yes, please to all of that and more table beers and grisettes and saisons. But realistically, I don't think, the market is shifting away from the hazies and the seltzers. And, Sixpoint has 3 really good hazy IPAs, in very late production stages right now that are going to be rolling out soon, and brand new products. So we're definitely on board with, consumers still loving those hazy beers and the pastry stouts and stuff like that. So I think hopefully it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all delicious. So whichever way the trends go, we'll follow. Brewers will follow too.
Absolutely.
Well, guys, I think we have a pretty good prediction on what the year's going to look like. Maybe we can revisit this in a couple months and see where we're at, but I'm definitely hoping for some more sessionable dark beers. And, I hope that brewers continue to experiment and try new things, even in the weird times that we're in.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Kat, thank you for having me. Max, same.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you for joining us.
All right.
Cheers,
Well,
looking forward to hopefully drinking lagers sitting at a bar at the end of 2021, but not super hopeful yet.
Yeah. Hopefully it won't be too long before we can all do this in person.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.